our assessment webinar yesterday morning for U.S. history ended up having to be canceled because of these audio problems. So the PDF and recording of this webinar will be uploaded to the Assessment Guidance Library early next week. That's the place where you would go to access our assessment guides. It'll be there, or they will be there. Okay, so let's start with a comparison of what we've been doing to what we will start doing this fall with our fall admin. So one of the reasons that we wanted to make this shift, that the department wanted to make this shift, was for comparability reasons. Our previous EOC has been limited to within Louisiana, and now we're going to expand to be able to compare with other states like we have done with our grades 3 through 8 tests for ELA and math. We are looking for consistency within systems, so we had a separate EOC system with different achievement levels, and now we're looking at one seamless system, the LEAP 2025 system, with the same achievement levels, similar design, so kids have the same expectations for their tests throughout their careers in high school. And then also we're looking to be able to report by or report to support the college and career ready claim, as opposed to just reporting by discrete domains where it's an end of course test and you get information about a student's course knowledge. These tests are designed to give more information than just course knowledge, but also are they developing the skills to support college and career readiness. We move from a majority multiple choice test to a test with more dynamic type of items that still include multiple choice, but also multiple select, fill in the blank, and some technology enhanced. And then much more constructed response so that we get a clearer picture of the students to be able to demonstrate their reasoning and modeling skills within mathematics. And that also helps to support that college and career ready claim, which our previous tests have not supported. Okay, and so what we want to stress is that the new assessments focus where the standards for mathematics focus. And so instructions and assessments really support each other in this journey. And so we're looking at conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and application. In the first list, in the first bullet of each list, the italicized words are kind of those keywords that you might pull out that would help you see where those shifts fit. And then also the rest of the bullets kind of detail the different skills within those shifts. So now we're looking at not only assessing the student standards for mathematics, but we're also assessing the reasoning and modeling mathematical practices in a more direct way. So if you've accessed the assessment guides, you hopefully have looked at the appendix with the accessible content tables to see that not only is there a listing of math standards, but also a listing of what we call the LEAP 2025 evidence statements. And this is the link to the math practices. Now, all of these evidence statements tie to the standards themselves, so they're not a separate entity. And we'll talk about those a little bit more in depth. We're now structured on 4 reporting categories, and the accessible content tables are split in the same manner. So there's a table for major content, one for additional and supporting content, then expressing mathematical reasoning, and modeling and application. So when we talk about the different tasks, we talk about them as task types. There's type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 is our machine scored items. They can be 1 point, majority or 1 point. Some are 2 point items, and they'll have 2 parts, Each part is machine scored. Each part is worth a point, and we'll look at an example of that. And then there is one 4-point item on the Algebra 1 test and one 4-point item on the geometry test that is type 1, machine scored. Each part, so it's 4 parts, each part is worth 1 point. So it might be part A is multiple choice, part B is a fill in the blank, part C is a fill in the blank, and part D is another multiple choice. This would not be any CR items that would require hand scoring. So type 1 items can be directly aligned to the student standard to assess conceptual understanding, fluency, and application. And it's reported either as major content or additional and supporting content. Or it can be a LEAP 2025 evidence statement where we're looking at the application and or conceptual understanding with a focus on integration of student standards. So it still ties back to the standards, but here's a look at integrating those standards, and we'll see an example of that. And you'll see that it's an organic integration. It will make sense. For type 2 and type 3, these are our CR items, constructive response items. They're hand scored. They might have parts that are machine scored, and I'll break that down too. These are aligned to evidence statements. So for type 2, these are the reasoning ones. They are students may be asked to provide written arguments, justifications, critique reasoning. It might involve some precision of mathematical statements. And they all align to specific student standards for mathematics. And same for type 3, except this application is with modeling. It may be in a real-world context or using symbolic logic. So on the lower grade levels, we look at modeling. We look at, building area models for multiplication or something like that. And in the upper grades, we're looking at modeling as writing functions to model represent situations, or graphing to model a situation. So in those cases, some of those might be more about symbolic logic than just than an application in a real-world context. So here's an example of a type 1 task. This is a 1 point. It's a technology-enhanced task, a drag and drop. So students would drag the sentence that corresponds to either similar or not similar. In this case, they would have to get each sentence in its correct place and no sentence in an incorrect place in order to get the 1 point. And this is an example of a 2-point type 1 task. It's machine scored. Each part is worth a point. They are not dependent on each other. So if a student gets part A right but gets part B wrong, they get 1 point. If they get part B right but get part A wrong, they get 1 point. Hopefully they get both parts right and they get their 2 points. But they're not dependent on each other like some of the other courses. So looking at the accessible content table, this is just kind of a snapshot picture so that we can kind of look at the difference in the wording. This is from the major content reporting category. And so these are type 1 machine scored items. You can see that the beginning of the table starts with content standards. So it's got the exact coding from the standards documents that we have online with the exact wording. And so alignment would be to the exact wording of the standard. And that list continues, listing out all the standards that are major content that are applicable here. And then the table then moves to LEAP 2025 evidence statements. And to read the coding on these statements, they always start with LEAP, so you know it's going to be reasoning or modeling and connection to the mathematical practices. Then it has the Roman numeral. I'm sorry, I said connection to reasoning or modeling, and I mean that it's an evidence statement, not necessarily just a reasoning or modeling, sorry. The Roman numeral indicates which task type it belongs to. So 1 for type 1, Roman numeral 2 for type 2, Roman numeral 3 for type 3. So here's a type 1, so we'll know it's machine scored. A1 for Algebra 1, and then it just starts with sequential sequential numbering starting with number 1. Then it goes into the type of integration that we're looking for. So this is understand the concept of a function and use function notation with content from FIFA, so at the cluster level basically. And if you read through the clarification, it's all stuff that fits within the standards of that cluster. It's just a more authentic way at getting at the connection between the skills in that cluster. And then so to continue with type 1, there's then a table for additional and supporting content. Starts with the content standards, uses exact coding from our standards document and exact wording from our standards document for the applicable standards. And then it continues on to LEAP 2025 evidence statement. So starts with LEAP, Roman numeral 1 for type 1, A1 for Algebra 1. And then I said the numbering was sequential for type 1, so the major content ended with LEAP I A1.6, and so this table picks up with LEAP I A1.7. And then the numbering at the end is just so that we can keep them separate, basically. And so in this case, the listing is, the integration here is apply properties of rational and irrational numbers to identify rational and irrational numbers. And so it's looking at the NRNB cluster. And then there's some clarification here that tasks should go beyond asking students to only identify rational and irrational numbers, and so on. So it gives you some direction as to what that integration would look like. So for type 2 tasks, it starts with the type of reasoning. And in this, I guess, diagram here, or this organizer here, I've listed out some of the basic types of reasoning, but when you actually look at the evidence statement, and we will look at an evidence statement, it'll be more specific about the reasoning. So common types of reasoning that we are looking for students to be able to demonstrate are, for example, base explanation reasoning on specific concepts or reference. So they might need to do something in the coordinate plane and base their explanation on coordinates. Or we might ask them to present a logical argumentation, solution steps, chains of reasoning, refute or justify propositions. So maybe, you know, a student has made a claim and they have to decide if that claim is correct and provide reasoning for that. And then application of reasoning to a specific concept or skill. So once the type of reasoning is described, then there's a listing of applicable content. So this is where the connection to the standard or standards, because sometimes it includes multiple standards, is listed. And then there might be additional guidelines to help guide folks on the type of reasoning. Task components, these are either worth 3 points or 4 points. So we have 3-point type 2 tasks and we have 4-point type 2 tasks. They may involve reasoning and computation components. So there would be points for reasoning and points for computation. And at least 2 points must be assigned to reasoning components. There can be multi-part of a variety of item types, but at least one part has to be constructive response. So for example, you might have a 2-part item where one part is multiple choice and the other part is the CR part where they would then, I don't know, explain their reasoning or something like that, or make a connection between the multiple choice item that they already answered. And the hand scorers would have that selection as like that student's choice for part A when they hand score that second part. And then a sample response would be included in the rubric. Evidence statement. statements for these look like this. So it starts with LEAP, Roman numeral 2 for type 2, A1 for Algebra 1, and then the sequential numbering starts over because now we're looking at type 2. And so it starts with the type of reasoning that we're looking for, base explanations, reasoning on the properties of rational and irrational numbers, and then the content scope is listed. So the standard that it applies to is NRNB3. And then it gives some clarifications or guidelines for rational solutions, exact values are required, so that you as teachers know what those expectations for your students are. And this simplifying or rewriting radicals is not required. That is true of the entire test, but we thought it would be great to continue adding it here so that it's very clear that that's not an expectation of our students on the test. And so here's a sample type 2 task. Students would use the figure and determine if it's a parallelogram and explain why or why not using the coordinates to justify their answer. And a rubric for this looks like this, where it shows 2 points for reasoning. So they determine the figure as a parallelogram, and they provide a valid explanation, and they actually give multiple ways that students could come to this explanation. And then computation component, so they provide the slopes or lengths necessary to make their determination. And so if we look at the same type of graphic organizer but with the specifics for this item, the type of reasoning involved was apply geometric reasoning in a coordinate setting and or use coordinates to draw geometric conclusions. The applicable content is GPE-B4, use coordinates to prove simple geometric theorems algebraically. No additional guidelines are given with this evidence statement. And then the breakdown of the task components we talked about when we looked at I talked about when I looked at the rubric. Okay, so for type 3 tasks, again, we start with a graphic organizer, and it starts with the type of modeling that we're expecting the student to be able to demonstrate. So solve multi-step contextual word problems, reasoned estimates, or micro-models are some of the primary types of modeling that we would ask for. And then after that initial statement of the type of modeling that we're expecting students to demonstrate, then there would be a listing of applicable content. So the standard that this directly relates to, and then some guidelines that may be provided with that evidence statement. Type 3 tasks are either worth 3 points or 6 points. They may have modeling and computation components. At least 2 of the 3 or 3 of the 6 points must be aligned to modeling. And again, they can be multi-part with a variety of item types, but at least one part is going to be constructive response. So here's what it looks like in the accessible content table. The first one listed here is a LEAP Roman numeral 3 for type 3 for modeling, A1 for Algebra 1, and then sequentially starts at number 1 again. The type of modeling that we're looking for here is to solve multi-step contextual problems with degree of difficulty appropriate to the course. And if you notice, the standards listed are actually below grade level, and that is common in modeling, that there is at least some of this. It does happen in reasoning as well. If you're not familiar with these codings, RP is ratio and proportion, NS is the number system, EE is equations and expressions. And so these are basically foundational skills that the students should be coming in with. One way that you can assess if students are not coming in with these skills is to access our Elite 360 system and administer the diagnostic test. And that can give you an indication of what skills they are bringing into the course and where remediation might be necessary. But the reason for using the previous grade level skills here is, our content here, is because the focus for this particular standard is seeing that multi-step problem solving to get at that college and career ready claim, where if there was a gap in on-grade level content, we may not be able to see if that modeling process is fully matured or not. And that's what this particular evidence statement is designed to do. They're not all on previous grade level content. Many are on grade level content, major content as well. So this particular example for this modeling task involves different candles being quality control tested for their weight loss after a certain time burning. And students are asked to write an equation to model the weight. Sometimes they're just asked to write or to determine a model. So they would have to figure out, oh, that's an equation that I need or a function. And then use that to explain a prediction of the weight after 5 hours. Use that model that they've created. And a rubric for this shows that there are 2 points for modeling with the correct equation. Now this is not, this is an example of a micro models type of modeling evidence statement. And so let me move to the next slide because there's an explanation of that. When we look at micro models, we're asking students to autonomously apply a technique from pure mathematics to a real world situation. So in the case for this example, the information given is not a true linear association. So the rate is not necessarily exact. So while it says correct equation here, if this were a true operational item instead of just an example item, materials would be developed to include what are all the reasonable equations that students could develop from this particular information that's given. So this is probably the most common equation that you should get, but doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't others that could be determined. So there would be a point for a correct equation or a valid equation, and then a point for accurate use of notation and vocabulary, defining variables or identifying variables as needed. So that's a precision point comes in there. And then a computation point for making that accurate prediction. So they then use their model to come to this answer of 15.05. And so that answer is based on the model that they use. So let's say if they come up with some off-the-wall kind of model, but they've applied it correctly, so to speak, then that result that they get out of it could still earn some credit. And so if we apply the model, the graphic organizer to the information specific to this task, the type of modeling, we're looking at micro models, and then applicable content here is ACED A3 to represent constraints by equations or inequalities, and by systems of equations and or inequalities, interpreting solutions as viable or not viable. And there's no real extra guidelines given in the evidence statement. Then with the task components, I talked about this with the rubric. It's 3 points and how the points are broken down. And then there's a sample response shown in the rubric. So test administration, what is different? So our item types are different. Previously, we had a predominantly multiple choice test. In addition to multiple choice and construct and response, we are now including multiple select, fill in the blank, and technology enhanced items. The sessions were typically split by item type, no calculator or calculator use. There's still 3 sessions, but the split is a little bit different. So session 1 is actually split into 2 parts, a no calculator part and a calculator part. And there's a very clear separation here. So students will complete the no calculator part, they will stop, and then all students will start the calculator part together. So that gives time for test administrators to pass out handheld calculators if a district is choosing to use handheld calculators, which we recommend, so that students are using a device that they're familiar with. And it is easier to manipulate the handheld device as opposed to what's online, although we are trying to make what's online easier to manipulate. We cannot say that a particular item type is in each session because there's now a much wider variety of item types. So there's, the multiple select, fill in the blank, technology enhanced. I can say that there's no constructive response in the no calculator part of session 1. So for all the constructive response items, they are spread over the other calculator parts and sessions. Previously, students were provided a scientific calculator online, and they could use the handheld. They can still use the handheld. Geometry reference sheet with no algebra reference sheet. They had an online tools training last year, but it was pretty basic. And then we're given rulers and a protractor, and also there were sample item documents online. Now, there is still that scientific calculator and a graphing tool if you've accessed the diagnostic test or the interim 1 or the teacher access for the practice test, which I have information about the teacher access to the practice test towards the end of this presentation, which I will get to. If you've accessed any of that, then you've seen what this graphing tool looks like. We are working to modify this situation to be able to provide a graphing calculator. We are working towards that right now. So we will include more specific calculator information about what's provided online once that is settled, which hopefully will be soon. We also have a high school math reference sheet that can be now applied both for Algebra 1 and Geometry. It's available on in eDirect and on the website in the Assessment Guidance Library. It's one PDF in the Assessment Guidance Library that includes all the reference sheets for all grades. It's the last page, but I'll show a screenshot of it so you can see what it looks like. Then online tools training is currently being updated, and we're finalizing that. Should be ready to go real soon. And practice tests, like I said, are available for teacher access, Algebra 1 and Geometry. We are working to get student access available as soon as we can. And then another big change is that, back to materials. We are not providing rulers and protractor online because they're not necessary, and they just tend to be a distraction, really, for kids that otherwise would not need to use them. There are some allowable geometry tools for students to be able to use that are listed in the assessment guide for geometry that students could use with the graph paper that they have. So say, for example, they need to do a rotation. They could graph that figure and use their protractor to do the rotation on their graph paper. So you can access those allowable tools in the assessment guide and talk to your school test coordinator about what you'd like to be able to provide. We did take down the sample items documents only because we thought, well, one, we'd have to take some items out, but also then it would be just majority multiple choice, and we didn't want to be misleading. So there are sample items in the assessment guides, and those same items will be accessible in the OTT, and then, of course, there's the practice tests, which are full length. Another big change is that we move from untimed to timed. Each session is 80 minutes. Session 1 is split into Part A and B. Part A, the no calculator session, is 25 minutes, very short. It's a 9-point. The session is worth 9 points. There's not a whole lot to it. And then Part B is 55 minutes. So the bulk of the test now is calculator allowed. much more so than previously. We worked to make sure that these times accurately reflect student time needed to take the tests. Test design, right now, the best we can do is break down into points, just because we need the flexibility on item placement at this point. Once we have that more stable, we've had a couple of test administrations, then we'll be able to break out this table more into number of items in each session in future assessment guides. So it's a total of 68 points for the whole test, and that is similar to grade 8 where they have a 66-point test. There's a listing of embedded field test items and the different types. Those field test tasks do not count towards the student's final score. We've always embedded field test tasks, and that was accounted for in the time that we determined for the sessions as well. Here's a screenshot of that math reference sheet. And some sample items. So this first sample item is a two-part item. It's machine scored. Part A is multiple choice and Part B is multiple select. For the multiple choice, students can only select one answer. If they try to select a different answer or an additional answer, it will mark that other one. So if they selected C and then try to select B, it will unselect C and select B. They can only choose the one answer. For multiple select, they may or may not be told how many specific correct answers there are. And this is also true of grades 6 to 8. So in this example, they're told to select or indicate all the correct answers. For some, they might be told choose the 3 correct answers. They could ostensibly choose every single option here. Multiple select are worth 1 point, and they have to choose each correct response and no incorrect responses in order to get that 1 point. Okay, and then we have 3 different ways that we can get kids to type responses. And so this first type is fill in the blank, and in this box, students can only enter specific characters. So they can only enter numbers, a decimal, and a negative sign. They cannot enter slashes for fractions. So no, if it's a fractional answer, it'll either be as keypad input or they'll need to convert to decimal. They can't enter dollar signs or letters or anything else. So here it's just numbers, decimal, and negative sign. And any equivalent form is accepted. So if they put in 0.6, and that's the correct answer, then 0.6 is also correct, and 0.60 is also correct. So any equivalent form will also score correctly here. This is a keypad input. This is new to all our testers this year. Grades 5 through 8 didn't previously have this item type. And this is to be able to machine score more than just negative numbers or decimals. So students could input fractions, they can put in equations or expressions, and any equivalent form will be scored correctly based on the scoring algorithm that we input. So for example here, the students are told to simplify and solve for S, and so they would input here the expression that completes the equation that solves for S. Typically we tailor all these buttons to just what the students need or might need. In this case, since this is going in the OTT, we put in a bunch of extra buttons so students could explore those. But like for grade 5, we only use this for fractions. So for grade 5, they literally just have the numbers. the decimal, and the fraction key is right here. So, but for high school, there's a bit more. It doesn't necessarily need to be all of this, depending on what the item is, though. Okay, and then the third type is our constructor response box, open response box. And so to talk about this a little bit, because we had quite a bit of questions about it throughout the year last year from all grade levels, concerns about students typing their responses. Please know that our hand scorers are trained thoroughly in pulling out the best responses from our kids. So they are looking for the good in what our kids are putting. And in these open response boxes, the open response box is the box in the back with the gray bar at the top. That's what kids see when they first open the item. That's where the bulk of their answer should go. So text typing, all of that should be done in this open response box. They do not necessarily need to open this equation builder for the most part, except for a few specific cases that I can think of that I'll get to. But this little box up here that says EQ on the gray bar, that opens the equation builder. But let's say they don't want to use it. They don't necessarily have to. So like they can still enter an exponent using the caret key. They can still indicate a fraction with slashes here. They could use the less than and greater than symbols that are on here. They could use the absolute value bars that are on the keyboard. Any key that's on the keyboard, they can use in this open response box. They do not have to use the plus sign from the equation builder. They can use the plus sign that's on the keyboard. Now, on the opposite of that, if a kid opens up the equation builder and decides they want to type their whole response in there, they totally can. It's going to look a little funky, and that's okay. We're fine. We can read funky. So, for example, it types letters in italics, but then it'll do something like if you type the word cost, it thinks you're trying to type cosine T, and so it'll unitalicize the COS and keep the T italicized with a space in between the two. It just looks funny, but our hand scorers are going to know that's cost, not cosine T. So they could type everything they wanted to type in that equation builder box if they are comfortable with it. Now, if you notice at the bottom of the equation builder box, it says 0/1000 overall character count. That is the total character count for the entire response box, not just the equation builder. So what's going to happen in the equation builder is it will only let a kid type 100 characters at a time. So let's say a kid types 100 characters in the equation builder, and then it gets the message that they've reached the character limit. All they have to do is press OK. It gets entered into the open response box, and then they open up that equation builder again and continue typing their next 100 whatever. They can open it as many times as they need to till they hit that 1,000 overall character count limit. So for example, if they're typing in the open response box, let's say they type 20 characters, then they open the equation builder, it's going to show 20 out of 1,000 because you've already got 20 characters in the open response box. Let's say they type 5 more characters, they press OK. Now they've got 25 characters in the open response box. If they open the equation builder again, now it's going to show 25 out of 1,000. So this counter at the bottom of the equation builder is a counter for the entire open response box. I know this is confusing, or can be confusing. There's no way to remove this counter on the equation builder box, we have asked. So those are things that you could express with your kids. But just know that our hand scorers are looking for the good in our kids' responses, and they have been reading our kids' responses for a long time. So they know how our kids type. An example of a technology-enhanced item, this is another drag and drop. So in this case, you're dragging, our students would be dragging the number to complete the function. This would be a 1-point item. Drop-down menus, students would select from each menu to complete the sentence. These are great to replace those types of multiple choice items where they would have these long sentences as their answer options where maybe 1 or 2 words was different in each sentence. Doing it this way reduces the overall reading load for the kids, and so it makes it a little bit easier for them to read through the test. Another type is this coordinate plane item. So on the bar at the top, you'll see that there's a variety of options for them to input. Typically for these items, we tailor it to just what they need. So for this particular one, they need to graph a line. And so if this were an operational item and not a practice item, because this will be in the OTT for students to practice with, then just this line drop down would be available. They would select that and then graph their line. Here, though, they have points, open point, they can shade a region, they have segment, ray, for them to be able to play around and see how those functionalities work. Okay, so before I get to this, I have a couple of questions on the side that I'm going to try to get to. I'm sorry if you're having trouble hearing. We still are trying to handle those audio issues. The only thing I could suggest is maybe dialing out and trying to dial back in. I tried to pull a variety of examples from geometry and algebra throughout this. And mainly it was just kind of what was handy or what I thought would be the better examples for this particular presentation. It wasn't necessarily trying to emphasize one over the other. So for multiple select, I have a question about partial points, or if it's all or nothing. It's all or nothing. So it's a one point item. We don't do half points. So they have to get all the correct answers and no incorrect answers to get that 1 point. And I know that's different from some of the other content areas. And students are able to use all the keys that are available on the keyboard. If they needed to explain their work, they don't necessarily have to show the symbolic explanation. Now, if they, so for example, if they needed to write an equation to model a situation, then they would need to use the symbols. But if they were then supposed to explain the steps they used to solve that equation, they could type add 28 to both sides. That would be perfectly fine. Or they could show plus 28 below each part. Okay, and then additional question, students, unless they are instructed to do so, do not typically have to list the property they're using if they're explaining how they solve an equation. But that might be something that's item specific. That's not typically something I see though. Okay, so what sort of action steps should be taken here? We want to make sure that you're assessing with a variety of item types so students get familiar with not only multiple choice in a math setting, but also multiple select. Well, most math tests are fill in the blank anyway, where kids have to show their steps. But also including reasoning and modeling within those classroom assessments. We want to increase opportunities for written expression of reasoning and modeling, not just on classroom assessments, but this should be a part of class lessons. This should be something that is a part of the learning environment. And incorporate that high school math reference sheet so kids know what's available to them and what they need to bring with, like in their head, what they need to bring with them to the test. Plan time for students to explore the OTT on multiple occasions. We hope that they get a good amount of time to practice with these things and don't just go in the one time to check it out, so that they're familiar with these item types when they get in there. And again, we are working furiously to get that out as soon as possible. We have a practice test guide available that lists some best practices for administering and reviewing and reviewing practice tests. These should not be used for any type of assessment of student mastery of standards. You should really be looking to the LEAP 360 interims to do something like that, and I'll explain how that LEAP 360 system works and can be helpful. The practice test guide is available now. It will be updated to include a little bit more information that's specific to high school, but there's a lot of stuff in it already that is very helpful. Our instructional folks want us to stress that teaching the standards is the best test prep, and to access the LEAP 360. So that's interims and EAGLE for support in assessing the mastery of the standards throughout the year. And that the biggest factor for success is the time spent engaged with on-grade level work. So if you've administered the diagnostic and you know that some remediation is necessary, that remediation should be incorporated with that on-grade level work. So resources. We are working to get those online tools available to you. Right now it's going through the QC phase for accommodations. So once that is ready, we should be ready to go. Students would have the opportunity to practice with all the different tools that are available and also with the different item types that are available. Practice tests, so these mirror the operational tests, the design and sessions and experience, but like I said, they're not a reliable source for assessing student mastery of the standards, because in some cases you might have one test item that's specific to that standard, and so there could be a variety of reasons why the student didn't get that particular question right. And remember, our standardized tests are scored differently than teacher-made tests. The teacher access link for high school is available, and this is a listing of the usernames and logins that you can use to access that. It needs to be accessed in Google Chrome. I think there was some trouble this morning. I sent out a message related to that, so hopefully that's been resolved and that teachers are able to access that and get a look at those tests, those practice test questions. We are working to get student access available. We're going through the quality control phase for the accommodated versions and also the scoring of it to make sure that it is scoring accurately. We also have a variety of math instructional resources available in the planning resource section of our library. So there's the standards and the teacher companion documents, which are incredibly helpful for relating the language in the standard to what that actually looks like as far as classroom application and sometimes even assessment items. There's focus documents and rigor documents. Louisiana Eureka guides, which have been updated to include diagnostic and interims within a sort of scope that's involved. And then for help with students who are struggling, there are remediation guides, which were used to help develop the diagnostic tests. And Eureka remediation tools, which are new, have also been developed and are very helpful. To assess standard mastery, the best help you can use is the LEAP 360 system. This is developed in-house by the same people who work to develop the actual summative test. So districts or schools that are using products provided by vendors, those vendors may make claims about alignment to our test, or some of them even say that they can report and predict how students are going to perform on our tests. I don't really know how they can make those claims because they don't work with us. So the LEAP 360 is a reflection of and a part of what we do every day with these tests. And EAGLE is also a part of that. The assessment guides, like I said, were updated August 22nd, and those are available on the planning page as well. And then there's some sample year-long plans. If you have more questions about any of these resources, you are encouraged to contact Louisiana Standards at la.gov. So LEAP 360, I've talked about this a lot and talked it up. It's really great. We want to stress that this can also help reduce overall testing. This should not be in addition to what districts and schools are already doing with district-made or in-house benchmarks, vendor-made purchased materials. This should be in lieu of. This should replace those things. There are other informational resources that are available on the Assessment Guidance Library page and also on the Practice Test Library page that can be helpful for you in planning. And then some changes to reporting. So we used to report by discrete content domains, and now reporting will be just like it is for grades 3 through 8 to support that college and career readiness claim. So we'll report by major content, additional and supporting content, expressing mathematical reasoning, and modeling and application. And those are just general descriptors for those individual reporting categories. So reporting to 5 levels now instead of 4 to match the grades 3 through 8 reporting. And then results. So the fall window has changed slightly. It was originally supposed to close December 13th, and it has been extended to close December 15th. Results released in January 2018. And spring and summer results are supposed to be within window, and that's the same as in the past, where if a kid takes the test on the last day of the window, then their scores would come back within 4 to 6 days of that. So that's what we mean by in window. And then the new grading conversion tables for Algebra 1 and Geometry are going to be provided later on in this fall once that's been determined, so that teachers can calculate grades, course grades from that. Okay. So we have additional webinars, U.S. History tomorrow morning, bright and early, followed by English 1 and 2 twice during the day. That U.S. History is a reschedule from the problems that we had yesterday morning where we had 0 audio. So if you need to schedule any of those are available. Again, the PDF and recording for each of the webinars is going to be uploaded to the Assessment Guidance Library early next week. And if you have, actually, let me check out the side here for some questions to see. Okay. We don't have an exact date on when that practice test is going to be available. We are working to turn it around as quickly as possible. We also want it to be highest quality as possible. So we are doing the full quality control check and making sure that our accommodated materials also fall within that. So there will also be Braille and for math, the Spanish versions as well. So all of that will be available at the same time. For questions about Eagle, you need to actually email, sorry, I'm just going to scroll back up so I get the address right. Louisiana Standards at la.gov. So our instructional team handles the Eagle part. We coordinate and collaborate, but as far as what's actually going to be populated and uploaded, they can be more specific with that information for you. The Eureka Guide for Geometry is currently being worked on, and they are looking to have that available as soon as they can, but you would email Louisiana Standards at la.gov for more specific information on that. Eagle 2.0 is a part of the LEAP 360 system. The LEAP 360 diagnostic for Algebra 1 and Geometry is not available in paper form. That is online like the summative test. The achievement level ranges will not necessarily be the same for middle and high school. That is still being determined, and Bessie will need to approve those achievement level ranges in, I believe they meet in October. But when they next meet, we'll have that recommendation for them, and hopefully that will be approved and we can communicate that information. Okay, so I'll pause now if there are any additional questions that you'd like to type in. But if you find later that you've come up with some questions, you can email them to assessment@la.gov. And even if it's not something that we specifically handle, it'll get routed to the right person who can answer that question for you.
This has been a presentation of the Louisiana Department of Education, copyright 2017, all rights reserved. For more information or to contact the Louisiana Department of Education on the web, go to www.louisianabelieves.com or call 1-877-453-2721.